Welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Allison Fitzgerald Kojak. I am the 112th president of the National Press Club and I'm an incoming investigations editor at the Associated Press. Right now, I am unemployed. We're so pleased to have all of you here at the club today, and we extend warm greetings to those of you watching us on TV or listening to us on the radio. As Hurricane Dorian churns up the East Coast, climate change and what to do about it is at the top of the political agenda for many. Politicians have offered plans. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez put forward a controversial Green New Deal. Washington State Governor Jay Inslee built his now aborted presidential campaign around climate, and Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have called out fossil fuels as the primary culprit. Our guest today, Cecil Roberts, president of the United Mine Workers of America and a vice president of the AFL-CIO, says some critical people have been left out of the conversation. Workers who toil in the nation's extraction industries, such as coal and petroleum. Mr. Roberts says he's deeply concerned about the economic plight of those living in Appalachia and other coal mining regions. He knows of what he speaks. Mr. Roberts is a sixth-generation coal miner. Both of his grandfathers died in the mines. He grew up in a United Mine Workers household on Cabin Creek in Kanawha County and became a miner after serving in Vietnam in the 1970s. He has led UMWA members on strike, sat across the table from the Bituminous Coal Operators Association to hammer out contracts, and fought for health care, pension benefits, job security for his members, and all workers. Mr. Roberts is a graduate of West Virginia Technical College, and he rose through the union ranks to become president of UMWA in 1995. He succeeded Richard Trumka, who was elected secretary-treasurer of the AFL-CIO and now is the Labor Federation's president. He's been a guest here at the Press Club as well. Please join me in welcoming UMWA President Cecil Roberts to the National Press Club.
Well, if my mother and my father were alive today, I think they would say you're getting above your raising here. I want to thank Allison for that wonderful introduction. I want to thank the National Press Club for this opportunity. But I think most of all, I want to thank the coal miners who are in this room. I think we're having somewhat of a first here today. We have coal miners who are active and coal miners who are retired with us, and those would be the ones who are wearing camo, which is our colors. I want to thank my partner, Levi Allen, by the way, who's 37 years old, and we believe in young people having an opportunity to lead our union. But we also believe young people working in the mines should have a future, which, by the way, if you live in Appalachia, are the best jobs in Appalachia. Middle-class wages, health care, better than anybody else's, pensions, which support teachers who reside and teach young people in Appalachia. It supports all the programs we depend upon. Fire departments, police departments. And these miners who are with me, plus all of those members of the UMWA that we know are gathered up right now in about 6 states because they've been watching this debate that's ongoing in the United States of America, where people are constantly saying, well, we're just going to do away with these jobs. So these miners who have families at home, these retirees whose pensions are at risk, which is about 100,000 people, most of them in Appalachia, are worried about this ongoing debate. It's hard for coal miners to have a voice in this country. because many people look down their nose at us and think, well, what in the world could somebody that mines coal have to say? And some people maybe just think we ought to keep our mouth shut, get out of the way. But as we have done for 100 years, we're not going to do that. So as we are here and trying to express our positions on the future of our planet and the future of our country, both economically and environmentally. So where is this going? One of the things that seems to be forgotten by everybody running for office, there's a word in front of climate change that I haven't heard anyone mention. That word's global climate change. It seems that people believe if they just shut down the coal industry and every extraction industry in this country, we've got the problem solved. But we all know, not just me, but scientists know that's not true. So I'm not here to talk just for me. I'm trying to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless here. As I come here today, I want to remind you that 100,000 plus coal miners have died, making the United States the economic force that it is. We've had an abundance of cheap electricity that we've built our economy on for 100 years. But it cost us 107,000 people's lives, killed sometimes instantly, sometimes over the course of days after being injured. Explosions, roof falls. The nation loves us when they watch on TV about the poor miners who died in the mines. Then they go about their business the next day. So another 100,000 at least have died from pneumoconiosis. And people say that's a terrible disease and we ought to get rid of it, and then we forget about those who have pneumoconiosis. That's a fact. We've lived this now forever. There are 34,000 participants in the 1974 pension plan that have died in 7 years. And there are 76,000 miners who've died from pneumoconiosis since the year 1968. So as participants in the 74 plan die, people die from black lung, people are killed in the mines, we're starting to think that the government's just waiting on us all to die and go away. I hope I'm wrong about that. I'm pretty darn angry as I come here today because I've read things people have said about us. Uneducated, we're racist, we're all kinds of things just because they don't like what we do. You've never heard us call people names just because we don't like what they say about us. But the truth is, this is the most progressive union that's ever existed on earth. 1890, our Constitution said you can't discriminate because of race, creed, color, national origin. 1890, first convention. Then from there, the same convention, there was a debate about how we could help the African American workers in this country, and that's probably the only place that debate was taking place. And then in 1935, we were the largest union in the country, and we didn't just say, oh, that's great that we're the largest union in the country. We created the CIO and said the auto industry should have a union, the steel industry should have a union, the textile unions workers should have a union. Everybody should have a union. So you're looking at the union that created the middle class. And we said people of color, regardless of where they come from, what language they speak, should be able to hold union office for the first time. So Those who look down their nose at us, they're wrong, don't know what they're talking about, and they should probably read their history. Everybody wants to get their picture taken with a coal miner that's running for office. Isn't that amazing? But they don't want anything to do with us when they get in office. The first person that I recall, and one of the most iconic pictures ever, was Eleanor Roosevelt. 1935, this woman went underground. And a woman underground in 1935 was considered bad luck. Women should not be underground. And in those days, this country was saying too many miners are being killed in the mines. The largest union in the country and the most powerful labor leader was saying too many people are being killed in the mines, and that was John L. Lewis. And then Eleanor Roosevelt goes underground, and she comes back out, and they throw a mic in front of her face, and they said, "Madam First Lady, what will it take to protect miners?" Does anybody know what she said? Unionization and legislation are the only two things that will protect coal miners. But if I asked you, you had the President of the United States as the best friend any worker ever had in those days was Franklin Roosevelt. First Lady wanted the mines to be safe. Then I asked you, how long was it before the first legislation was passed by this government to protect coal miners? 1969. So we had the most powerful president we ever had. We had the First Lady wanting to make the mines safer, and we had the most dynamic union leader of all time trying to make the mines safe, and we couldn't get it done until 1969. Why is that? Because it is really hard, folks, to get Congress to move, because there's a lot of powerful interests, if you don't understand this, that says we're not for that. Lots of money spent to stop people from being killed in the mines. So coal miners understand something. When people tell us, we're going to pass legislation, and you're going to have the best jobs in the world. They're going to be union jobs. Don't worry about anything. Your pensions will be saved and your health care. We don't believe it. And anyone that understands how Congress works knows that that's a fact. So when people keep telling us how wonderful we're going to have it, we've got many reasons to believe that's not the case. Legislation would not have been passed in 1969 if 78 miners hadn't died instantly at Farmington and the entire country watched that on television. That's how we got legislation. People across this country in Florida and New York and California for the first time said, I can't believe there isn't legislation that protects miners. By the way, up until 1969, there was no legislation that identified pneumoconiosis as an occupational illness. So we mine coal for over 150 years here without any protection for coal miners, without any recognition of black lung. So that's how quick things move in Congress and how people pay attention to the concerns of coal miners. We've had lots of experience with this. Well, heck, they used to pay us in company money, and nobody cared. They used to lock us up in the coal camps. Nobody cared. They only cared when there was a resurrection of coal miners or insurrection of coal miners. Matewan, Blair Mountain, Ludlow Massacre, leading up to the Wagner Act in 1935. 1960, a young man comes to West Virginia, and his entire presidency was resting on whether or not a Protestant state would actually vote for a Catholic. Do you realize that was a huge issue in the 1960 election? John Kennedy went up every hill and holler in West Virginia. I was 14 years old, and my dad came home and says, I just shook hands with John Kennedy. And I thought, well, what'd you think, Dad? He said, I like that young man. And he won West Virginia. And he had great plans for West Virginia. He wanted to help West Virginia. But you know what happened to him. We've had many other politicians. But my favorite story about John Kennedy might be when he went to Welch, West Virginia. Something to put in your mind here. There was a young man, 17 years old. His dad was a foreman at a coal mine. And by the way, movies have been made about this and books have been written about this. This young man was named Homer Hickam. He's down in busy Welch in 1960. And there's John Kennedy making a speech that nobody's listening to. So Homer, being an inquisitive young man, and was fascinated by Sputnik. And he even went out to make sure he could see it as he went over the mountains of West Virginia. And he's standing there listening to John F. Kennedy speak. And John Kennedy says, anybody have a question here? And Homer, son of a coal miner, says, I do. And John Kennedy said, well, young man, what's your question? He said, what do you think about putting a man on the moon? And all the miners laughed, and John Kennedy laughed about how ridiculous that question was. We know what happened. John Kennedy started the space program, and do you know what happened to Homer Hickam? Rocket scientists, right out of the hills and hollers of West Virginia. So our state tore down one of the barriers of prejudice in this country. No matter where you went to pray, we were okay with you if you could do something for Appalachia. So we get a president named John Kennedy, and he was struck down early. Lyndon Johnson gets elected. He had a war on poverty. But unfortunately, many of us ended up my age at that time. When you turned 19 in Appalachia, you were heading to Vietnam. Now, that wasn't the case everywhere, but we didn't have a lot of money, and our fathers didn't. We weren't rich, so we went off to Vietnam. And that's the story of almost everybody in Appalachia my age. Many of the retirees that we've been fighting for are Vietnam veterans. Got one or two with me here today. So off to Vietnam we go, and then I am fortunate enough at some point in time in my life to have a few breaks after working in the coal mines. I happened to end up down in Lebanon, West Virginia, in southwest part of the state. And I'm with a young man that wants to be president of the United States named Barack Obama. And he's standing on the stage and talking to a lot of people who are worried about their jobs in 2008. And Senator Obama said, if we can put a man on the moon, something John Kennedy started, we can learn how to burn coal cleanly. Well, I agreed with that. I agreed with this senator who became president. Unfortunately, as time went on, I think he was unable to do what he thought he could do as a candidate. Now we see the coal fields of Appalachia being devastated. People are talking about us needing a transition. Well, our transition, unfortunately, has been at the bankruptcy courts. And what you get out of a bankruptcy court is whatever your union can win for you and whatever power you have. We have miners in this room right now that's been through bankruptcy, and their companies are out of bankruptcy, but they no longer earn credit in the 1974 pension plan because a bankruptcy judge says they shouldn't have to pay. We have people who lost their health care in the bankruptcy courts. And no one really cares about this, let's be honest. This has been going on since 2012. We've been on Capitol Hill for 10 years fighting for our pensions. We've been on Capitol Hill since the 90s fighting for our health care. And we do have friends on Capitol Hill, but we don't have enough friends. So what happens? It's a fortune spent out of the Union Treasury trying to protect these benefits, both pensions and health care. And now people are saying, it's going to be better. We're going to pass legislation. It'll be just like that. It's not going to happen. So what we probably would submit to folks who are wanting to be president of the United States, whether it's Donald Trump or any of the candidates running for office, first of all, let me say, coal's not back. Nobody saved the coal industry. Now, that's a harsh fact, and that's a harsh reality. The reason I say that, coal-fired power plants are closing all over the United States. And if enough of those close, the market does this. And our people who are mining steam coal are the most productive coal miners on earth, and they still have their jobs. But the market keeps shrinking every day. So what happens as the market continues to shrink? We've needed a transition of some type for about 20 years now, and no one's offered one up. But everybody's got one now, and that's a fact. And people, first thing someone's going to say is, you don't believe in climate change. That's not true. We have never denied, ever, the existence of climate change. It's real, and it's upon us, and it needs to be dealt with. However, how we deal with it is the question. So in 2009, I want everybody to remember this, we supported the Waxman-Markey bill, which would have invested heavily in clean coal technology to remove carbon from the burning of coal. It went to the Senate, and it died in the Senate. We controlled, I say we, the Democrats, the House, the Senate, and the White House. All three of those governments that we depend, 8 parts that we depend on, both houses of the Congress and the White House, and it died in the Senate. Many of my friends who were in Congress at the time lost their jobs over that. So when people say, all we need is more Democrats or more people here or more people there, we've been down this road, and this failed after many people putting their careers on the line. So we need to develop technology to remove carbon from the burning of coal, or you're never, write that word down, never going to resolve climate change. Never. Why is that? Well, let's think about that. There are 1,600 new coal-fired power plants being constructed as I speak around the world. There are 2,000 coal-fired plants that exist in the world as I speak. And here's what somebody's going to say. Well, you're just pointing the finger somewhere else, you don't want to do anything. No, I'm telling you what you're doing doesn't work. How are you going to get China, who has probably 5 million coal miners, 52,000 in the United States, 5 million in China, 7 million coal miners in the world. And the only thing I hear people talking about who wants to be president is how they're going to save all the coal miners in this country or get rid of all the coal miners in this country. Do it tomorrow. You still are not solving climate change. And somebody's going to say, oh, China's doing all these things. Let me explain something to everybody. We're dealing with facts here. This is real. This is what exists. If you were in a court of law, this would all be the truth that a jury would have to decide, right? This is a fact. China burns around 4 billion tons of coal every year. How much? 4 billion. Let me tell you what China's doing. And people say to me, well, we've got to do all these things in this country so the rest of the world will follow. You are telling me that China cares about what we do. I hate to say this, but we have a disagreement. China, by the way, manufactures all of the technology that we are rapidly trying to install on rooftops. That's a fact. We are rapidly doing that, and China says thank you this morning to the United States because we don't make it here. We have this belief we shouldn't make anything here. Why aren't we manufacturing solar panels in the United States? The jobs of installing these solar panels pay around $20 an hour. So coal miners, you need 2 of these jobs once you lose the one you have now, which is not ever talked about. And by the way, I understand somehow, magically, if certain people get elected president, they're going to make those union jobs and they're going to require them to pay what you make now. I don't believe that. I just can't make that work in my mind, that somehow somebody can be president and go to Congress and say, we're going to manufacture solar panels here, they got to be union jobs or they can't exist, and they got to pay what coal miners make. Not going to happen. Why don't we just say, we're going to do away with your jobs, and you're going to have 2 jobs for the jobs you got now, and that would be more closer to factual. Now, last year, the world consumed 7.5 billion tons of coal. You know that global word that nobody talks about? That's what global did, okay? Consumed 7.5 billion tons of coal. We're rapidly reducing the amount of coal in this country, but we're doing it very painfully. We have people sitting on railroad tracks in Kentucky right now because their checks bounced from the coal company they worked. Now, that's the kind of transition we have in America. Now, we've been in more bankruptcy courts than you can ever imagine, in and out, every time you turn around, and there's more coming. So those who want to rapidly do away with coal, one more bankruptcy in our union at Murray Energy. 13,000 households will be adversely affected by that, even though only 2,000 people work there, because 11,000 more people get their health care from that coal company. Do you know who ends up with all these problems? The union ends up with those problems. We've got our friends on Capitol Hill who have fought tooth and toenail. So what do we suggest has to happen? In 1935, I mentioned previously, was the first time in our history that workers had a right to join a union. Most people don't know that. In 1947, that ended. Most people don't know what happened in 47. The Taft-Hartley Act was passed. I'm going to put my radical hat on here for a few seconds, and I hope I don't offend anybody. But if you want to do something to give workers a right to organize again, my predecessor, John L. Lewis, said the Taft-Hartley Act was the first ugly thrust of fascism in America, and it was then, it is today, and nobody's talking about it. Abolish Taft-Hartley. That's a good start. Abolish Taft-Hartley. And you believe we should have a just transition? I'm going to prove to you right now no one really believes that's going to happen, including the people advocating it. Do just transition first. Let's do that first. You know what? There's not going to be a single person for that because they know they can't pass it. They know it'll be years and years of trying that. But I can tell you what is going to happen. We're going to continue to lose coal mining jobs, just like we lost steel worker jobs, just like we lost auto worker jobs, not because we can't compete, because of bad public policy. When I was in District 17, before I came to Washington, there were 182,000 union members, UMWA members. We're bouncing around barely double figures now. Why is that? Because we can't compete? No. Public policy put most of those people out of work. When the steel industry went down, the metallurgical coal mines went down. When we started dealing with acid rain, the next thing that happened, we moved union jobs to non-union Wyoming. So as we come here today, there's a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. But we have stood up and fought the coal industry. We've fought politicians who want to put us out of business. We've had heroes. We've just reenacted the Blair Mountain March. Most of you never heard of it. It's our largest armed insurrection in the history of this country, other than the Civil War, when coal miners stood up. Matewan Massacre, next year will be the 100th anniversary of that. So in 2 years, our anniversary of Blair Mountain, next year, the anniversary of Matewan Massacre. And if it wasn't for coal miners, many people in this country would not have a union. And many of the progressive ideas that we enjoy today were given to us by coal miners. So I could talk here for another 30 minutes, but I won't. But let me say this to you. We come today to be part of this conversation, not about people talking about us, but we want to talk with everybody. We want our pension plans saved. We want our health care plans saved. And if you can't do that, and it's been 10 years, how do you think we're going to believe that you're going to be able to give us a just transition from the coal industry to some other employment? With that, I want to thank the Press Club for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Again, I'll go to questions from the journalists in the room in a moment, so please wait for the microphone, and when the microphone reaches you and I call on you, please say your name and your journalism outlet. But I have one question. You mentioned a series of problems: one, pensions, health care, mine safety, health care of benefits for workers who have black lung. It sounds, you keep talking about politicians, but it sounds like your major grievance is actually with the coal companies who are taking away your pensions and taking away your health care and fighting you in bankruptcy court. Why are you pointing at Congress in this, and what is it specifically that you want?
Well, there's a couple of things we want from Congress, and every member of Congress knows this, too. This is not news to anybody on Capitol Hill. In fact, one of the major networks in this country has done a lot of work identifying our pension problem, our health care problem. First of all, every bankruptcy law that exists in this country, Congress has either ignored it or passed it. Anybody know what happens in bankruptcy? First of all, the CEO gets millions of dollars for filing bankruptcy. The CFO gets millions of dollars for filing bankruptcy. And then you go down the line, the next person gets $500,000, and everybody gets a bonus because the world just cannot function without them. They call those retention bonuses. And then what happens to the workers? They lose their health care upon retirement. Their benefits shrink if they're still working. And sometimes the bankruptcy judge says, you don't get to keep your job. You've been there 30 years, but that investment banker from New York doesn't want you here anymore, so you're out. The investment banker has been there 3 weeks, right? You get in line last. Congress has known this forever and has done nothing about it. And we've been on Capitol Hill, not just us, but every major union in this country saying we need bankruptcy reform. So anything that's happened in bankruptcy, I hold those elected officials who could have done something about this accountable for that, number one. Number two, we lost our health care in bankruptcy. And we went to the streets about this. There's a lot of conversation in the labor movement, and I love the young people who are out there, even if they don't agree with us. We need young people in this movement drastically. But the most militant people and the folks who've been out the most are not these young people. It's these retirees from United Mine Workers who've been to St. Louis over and over again at 10,000 a clip. Been to Columbus, 10,000 people there. Largest demonstration in West Virginia in 40 years by retirees. And they won their health care, first of all, $400 million that we convinced Peabody and Arch and Patriot to give us. And you know what we told the bankruptcy judge, and forgive me for my language, when the bankruptcy judge says you don't have health care, you don't have there's 52 issues here in the contract that we're going to impose upon you. We told Arch and Patriot and Peabody and this judge that they can just all kiss our ass because we had earned these benefits and we weren't going away till we got them. We kept our health care. We went to Capitol Hill and people said you can't pass health care legislation on Capitol Hill with Republicans in control, but we did. We have bipartisan support for our pension plan and have had since 2016. We were able to get this pension and health care out of the Senate Finance Committee, something no one thought was possible, and we believe if Congress voted tomorrow, it would pass. So yeah, I got beef with Congress. On black lung, just testified 2 months ago about what's happening in southern West Virginia and eastern Kentucky. You cannot count on coal companies to protect coal miners. Everybody knows that. You'd be crazy to believe that. I don't no offense to any CEO, but if we didn't get legislation until 1969, and we need legislation right today to protect those coal miners who are getting pneumoconiosis in southern West Virginia and eastern Kentucky and southwest Virginia. It's silica. Everybody knows it's silica, and people are dying and sick in their 40s. You know what the cure is for the most advanced stages of black lung? Anybody know? Lung transplant. You know how much it costs? $1 million. You know how long you live? 3 years. So yeah, Congress needs to do something to protect these miners. And the one thing they should do about black lung, they ought to take out of the coal operators' hands the responsibility for enforcing this. They are the ones that decide how much dust is in the mines. They're the ones that report this to MSHA. It's been the most ridiculous thing known to man since 1969, and we testified to that. Congress needs to act. By the way, since we're on health and safety, sorry to get carried away, but that's just me. I'm sorry. I'm passionate. Passion's okay. By the way, how many of you remember in 2010 when a mine exploded down in southern West Virginia and killed 29 men, the youngest one being 20 years old? And do you know what Congress told us 10 years ago? Well, we got to really examine this to see what happened. They knew what happened then. They know what happened now. They've done nothing. There's not been one law passed, not one word to protect coal miners after 29 people died just like that. And I knew many of those miners. I was friends with the Davis family, and they lost 3 people out of that family in that. And we sent one person to prison. Now the federal courts are thinking about exonerating him, which is the most absurd thing known to man. Oh, I cleared that up.
Just wait for the microphone.
Jennifer Deloe, Bloomberg News. Thanks for taking my question. You've talked a lot about candidates playing lip service to the coal industry going back decades. President Trump obviously promised to bring back mining jobs, to bring back the sector. You said it's not back. What should the president be doing? How do you feel about how he's performing on that promise from 2016?
I think as I went through, one of the things people will tell you that I almost never have a typewritten speech, but all the people tell me you have to be sophisticated when you come here, so I'm trying to be sophisticated while I'm here. I said coal is not back. And here's the thing, it is true that the president has cut back on some regulations that perhaps kept the coal industry from staying in existence. But here's the truth. We are still seeing the closing of coal-fired power plants dramatically. And what happens on the heels of that? The market, as I said, just keeps doing this. And eventually, there will be no market here. Only the strongest companies will survive. The good news is UMWA miners are some of the most productive miners in the world. The jobs that have been created, for the most part, by the way, are metallurgical coal mines, which go into the making of steel. By the way, if you wanted to help the coal industry dramatically, maybe we should start making steel in America again, as opposed to buying it from China and third world countries. That was a decision made by our government, that we don't really like jobs where people get their hands dirty. And those used to be middle-class jobs of health care and pensions. Steel workers went through a lot of these bankruptcies, and it was tragic. Our people kept their pensions. The reason they kept their pensions, my dad worked for Beth Energy, and he kept his pension and his health care because his pension was part of the multi-employer plan. So other employers are paying it. Most of the pensions were company-by-company pensions in the steel industry. My dad kept his health care because of the legislation that was passed in '92 as a result of the 1990 strike at Pittston and the legislation that passed on the heels of that.
This gentleman right here.
Yes, Randy Shostak, reporter with EOS at the American Geophysical Union. Thanks very much for your comments. I appreciate them. So science has told us that the world is facing dramatic challenges and consequences regarding climate change. You mentioned in your earlier comments about science, and in your written comments you said that UMWA has never challenged the science regarding greenhouse gas emissions and man-made climate change. It is happening and the world must address it.
Correct.
So what would you recommend that the union and the coal industry do to address climate change, including perhaps, as you noted earlier in your comments, carbon capture and storage?
Well, first of all, I'm speaking for the union and not the coal industry here. You're looking at a person who's been sued and fined and jailed, and I've got a relationship with the coal industry, but I don't speak for the coal industry. I speak for the workers in the coal industry. Let's look at what the United Nations panel on climate change said. They said, not just me, that if we don't develop this technology, we're never going to solve this problem. And there's a reason for that. The 1,600 new coal-fired power plants that are being built, they have no technology, that's bad grammar, there is no technology on those plants as they are being constructed. The existing 2,000 coal-fired power plants, no technology to reduce demand. That's just going straight into the atmosphere. The scientists at the United Nations believe the only way that we're ever going to deal with that is develop technology that extracts the carbon from the burning of coal, because coal, this is another fact. Coal is still the dominant fuel source in the world for generating electricity. Now, we may not like that, but that is a fact. And without this technology that hopefully we would develop and sell around the world, that's never going to change. And no matter what we do here in the United States, we will still have a global climate problem. The whole idea, I think, I don't want to speak for scientists at the United Nations, but if you read what they say, that's what they believe. That's why we need this technology.
So do you think that the federal government should fund the development and subsidize that technology?
Absolutely, and let me tell you why I believe that. So let's talk about dollars and cents here for a minute, and I made a C in math once, and Daddy bought me a new bicycle, so I'm not really good at the math here, but I have seen studies that suggest it would cost $4 trillion to go to complete generate electricity solely by renewables in this country. I understand what that means now. In Appalachia and other parts of the country, as coal has declined, we have seen some expansion in another area, and that's in natural gas and the technology that's been developed here. Many coal miners who lost their jobs found union jobs putting in pipelines for natural gas to generate electricity. Thousands and thousands of those jobs. Now, I understand what we're saying here. If we do what folks are suggesting, we go complete renewables, all of that would go away. We'll just stop doing that. We'll start all over, and we'll go to complete renewables in 10 years. So all those people that have those jobs now would lose those jobs, and that's why many, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but many in the building trades have similar thinking to us with respect to that. Yes, if we're going to spend $4 trillion to change how we generate electricity, let's spend $1 trillion, and I'd almost guarantee you we'd get the technology to solve the world's
This
problems.
gentleman right here.
Jan Petalski with 100 Days in Appalachia. You said that the union invited all of the Democratic candidates to come out and talk to the miners. Could you tell us who accepted so far?
I don't have the list, but I can tell you, at the time we sent the letter out, I think almost every candidate implied or indicated they would be interested in this. All of what I would call, I don't want to offend anybody, but the top tier candidates responded in a positive way. Now, here is a problem we have, so we can be clear about this. As you might guess, coal companies are not excited about having people who may disagree with them in their coal mines. So we're going to have a little bit of a struggle with that. One of the things that we're very serious about this, and we want all the people who may someday be president. We had a meeting at breakfast. I said, look, someday, the way things look now, if you believe the polling, there is a chance that one of the Democrats will end up being president of the United States. And we want whoever's the president, including, by the way, I have one comment I'd like to make towards the president right now, and it's not bad. But we want every candidate, would-be candidate, anybody who may become president understands the plight of the coal miners and what this is doing to Appalachia. Appalachia is struggling mightily, even maybe more so than years past. But what I would suggest to you is there's been interest shown by the top-tier candidates that are running for office, and we hope they take us up on this. But I think the President of the United States, who has repeatedly said he loves coal miners, you know, if he just tweeted, I mean, just make us 15 seconds of his day, that he felt that coal miners who were entitled to a pension should have it, I think that might be enough. And I'm not, that's a positive thing. I'm not being critical of the president by saying that. I'm pleading with him to do that. And I'm, you know, I know the difference between me and some other, I know so many of these people. I mean, when you've got 34,000 people who passed away and you've been to a lot of their funerals, you know their widows, you know their kids, and you know where they live. That's a world of difference than maybe having millions of members all around the United States and Canada. We're confined, in to most part, to Appalachia. We all know each other's families. This is really heart-wrenching for us to watch this happen. The good news is they died with the best health care in the world. The bad news is they died worrying themselves sick about whether their widow is going to have a pension to live on. So I'm asking the president today to consider tweeting for the coal miners of this country.
Can I ask a quick follow-up? Sorry. Has the president done anything beyond tweeting about the pensions?
He hasn't tweeted.
Oh, I thought you said he had a
hasn't. So he hasn't. I'm happy with a tweet.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Penny Starr with Breitbart News, and I went to an opening 2 years ago of a coal mine in Pennsylvania. I think there's been others that are technologically advanced to cleaner coal production. And also, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the employment has remained pretty steady. It was plummeting, and in the last 2 years, it's remained steady, not falling as fast. Can you comment on that, please?
I think if I wasn't clear on that, let me give it a try. What's happened is that the drastic reduction in the number of coal miners in this country has tapered off, but most of the new jobs are in the metallurgical coal fields where we ship coal mostly to other countries to make steel. I wish we were still shipping it to Pittsburgh to make steel, but we're not, because a lot of my brothers and sisters and steelworkers had jobs in those days, and they've gotten some jobs back here recently. But most of the growth and what has allowed the employment level to stay fairly stagnant here, as opposed to dropping. We're about 52 to 54,000 coal miners in the country, somewhere in that neighborhood. But remember, there's 7 million in the world, okay? And of course, I'm standing up here worried about the 52,000 that we have, okay? But it's tapered off. We haven't had the drastic reduction, but we have had coal-fired power plants closing rapidly, which is steam coal. It's just metallurgical coal that's allowed these numbers to stay where they are. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
This gentleman right here.
Hi, Cecil. Ian Colgren with Politico.
How are you?
Good. You mentioned in your opening remarks the situation at Black Jewel right now.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, the miners have been camped out for weeks on the train tracks because they weren't paid when the mine shut down. The administration did file a brief in bankruptcy court saying that the coal should be treated as stolen until the miners are paid. What else should the administration do, not only to help these miners, but to use this as an opportunity to rethink its approach to prevent this from happening again at mines that are in similar situations?
Well, let me just point out that Senator Manchin not only has been fighting for retirees' health care and pensions, he has a bill pending in the United States Senate dealing with bankruptcy, and I forget the Republican that's on that right now, but there's a bipartisan bill. Now, what we need is bankruptcy reform. We don't need miners not to get paid. Our current law basically says, I'm practicing law here now. Our law now says that wages are at the front of the line, if you're owed wages, but that's not happening here because of the speed that's happening, that this is moving in bankruptcy court. No worker should be paid on Friday, go to the bank and deposit that check and start paying his or her bills and find out the check bounce that they received from their employer. Then go back to the employer and find the employer is gone. Is that really the way our country should be working? How a Democrat, a Republican, a liberal, or conservative could look at that situation and say, yeah, that's okay. That's just not right. And I don't care where you come from or what kind of accent you got, like maybe I do here, but that's wrong. And we should take whatever steps are necessary to fix it, and it's really bankruptcy reform.
Right up back here.
Yeah, Isabel Jacoby, Swiss Public Radio. I also have a question regarding the Harlan County protest. How important is this protest for the coal miners in general?
Well, I think one of the things, let's talk about that for about 5 seconds here. Unfortunately, these miners don't have the benefit of a union. However, our people who are in the union in that area have rallied around those folks. They have given them moral support. They have been on the picket line with them. They've done everything they could possibly do to lift up those folks. I know an attorney that's been trying to help them, who is a very progressive attorney. He sees a wrong, and he's tried to, what's that Bobby Kennedy said? He saw a wrong and tried to right it. Folks know when they see something wrong. I mean, if you are walking up the road and you see somebody that's beaten up, you know they need help, right? These miners are sitting on a railroad track, and they've been doing this for weeks now. That speaks, you know what that does? That speaks terribly to about all of us. It speaks terrible to the laws in this country. It speaks a terrible image, I think, around the world for somebody to be sitting on railroad tracks because their checks bounce. And these people are just gone. I'm talking about the employer. They're just gone. And there's nothing being done, in my opinion, to help these miners to the degree they should. And the only thing that's going to stop this in the future, we ought to be up on Capitol Hill right now as the Democrats and Republicans and having a conversation about this and say, do we have people on Capitol Hill that think that's all right? Who are they? It just can't be right. That needs to be fixed. Sorry for the...
Hi, it's Courtney Schlisserman with Argus Media. You spoke earlier about the metallurgical jobs that have been added and the importance of steel. What are your thoughts on the tariffs?
Well, I think for the most part, I think that policymakers, people who are experts, I'm talking about on a broad range here, not on a narrow range. I think these tariffs have helped the steel industry in this country because people have gone back to work. Now, that's a fact. That's true. However, if you look at it on a broader range with respect to our economy here in this country, I think there's a lot of people who are really hurting, and that what comes to mind with respect to that is, to me, is our farmers are worried about what's going to happen once these tariffs end, whether they're going to have the market that they once enjoyed in places like China and particularly. So the fear is that these tariffs may trigger a recession and a trade war here that we really don't need. I've spoken out on terrible trade deals so many times that I can't count them all. I thought NAFTA was horrible, and I've said that many times. And a lot of the things we've done with respect to trade and agreements we've entered into have been terrible. The question you asked specifically was about the tariffs. I'm a little bit concerned they might be getting to the point where they're a danger to our economy.
We just have a couple more minutes. So we have a gentleman in the back with a question, and then if we have time, we'll go to one more.
Hi, Cecil. Thanks for doing this. Dave Jamieson with Huffington Post. As you know, anything in the Senate has to go through Mitch McConnell. When it comes to the multi-employer pension issue, if you guys don't get something passed by next year and there's a viable, strong challenger to McConnell, could you see your union's resources and your members rallying behind that member?
I think if you ask Mitch McConnell, we've rallied against him almost every election, but let me put it in some perspective. Our main goal here is to save our pension plan. And if Mitch McConnell wants to be a part of saving our pension plan, I will publicly thank him and say I appreciate it very much, and that ought to be helpful to him in his election. If he does not, then we will have to reevaluate that. If you ask Mitch McConnell, he'd probably tell you that we were the biggest pain in his butt the last couple of elections. So I would much prefer that Senator McConnell does what he did with the health care. We had one bill, pensions and health care, that passed out of the Senate Finance Committee, as I mentioned previously. He pulled the health care part out and supported it, and it passed. And 22,600 retirees now have their health care. We want him to do the same thing with pensions, and it would be a good thing for him. It'd be a good thing for us. But, of course, like everybody else, if we find ourselves after the first of the year in a predicament here, we'll have to decide what we want to do with respect to that.
I'm just going to follow up quickly. In your opening remarks, you mentioned the clean coal bill being killed in the Senate or dying in the Senate. How did that die? Was that also Senator McConnell?
No. No, and 10 years ago, and I'm not being critical of any one individual because, you know, you need 60 votes, obviously. It's a world of difference. Even though Democrats controlled the Senate, they didn't have 60 votes to move this, and it died. Had this passed 10 years ago, it's actually 2010, so I guess it's approaching 10 years, we would have been way down the road here with technology. So if you're not clear on where I stand, so before somebody says I don't believe in science or technology, I'm a great believer in science and technology. The question is everybody else a great believer in science and technology?
Okay, we have the last question back here.
Hi, thank you very much for coming here and talking about all these important issues. I just wanted you to address a little bit more specific. It's Matthew Daly, sorry, with the AP. I want you to address more specifically your criticism or your reaction to the Green New Deal and just sort of lay out what your concerns are.
I think, may I make a comment or two? I'm not angry at anybody here, by the way, any individual. I'm a great respecter of AOC, but she met with us. She supports our pension plan. She's spoken out on this. She said a good start in reconciling everybody's differences here is to go down to West Virginia and fix this pension plan. The pension plan's everywhere, not just West Virginia, by the way. But to state my concerns about it, I think we've expressed that publicly in letter form here to our members of Congress. First of all, trying to do this in 10 years seems to be, to me, impossible to do. And it's a $4 trillion cost, and we're talking about not just eliminating coal miners' jobs, which would also cost us our pension plan, our retiree health care plans, not to mention the middle class lifestyle our members enjoy right now. But it would also cost building trade jobs that they have now, utility worker jobs, and Boilermaker jobs, and a number of other unions. I don't think a good starting point for Democrats is to eliminate union jobs. It seems to me what Democrats need are a lot more union members as opposed to fewer union members as a start. And then at the end of the day, in 10 years, after spending $4 trillion and this happening, how many union members are we going to have? Because we do have to organize these people. And as long as you've got Taft-Hartley, you're not in a position to say, yeah, they're all union members now. That's not the way life works. We have to organize them. So we've expressed that, the timing of this, how quickly it happens, the cost of that, the elimination of union jobs. And by the way, what we said in that letter, so we're clear, is we want to be part of this conversation. And by the way, I should tell you that we've had conversations with folks who are advocating this. I don't want to leave here saying we're being ignored completely. People are saying we're willing to talk to you. We've had meetings up on Capitol Hill. We're here today to say we're not going away. We're going to be part of this conversation one way or the other.
Well, I am sorry, we are out of time. There are a lot more questions here. Before we let you go, I want to present you, Cecil Roberts, with the highly coveted National Press Club coffee mug. Thank you very much for being here.
I would tell you I've been wanting one of these since I was a kid. But when I was a kid, I didn't know what this place was, much less coveting the coffee. But I want to thank the Press Club. I want to thank you, and it's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.